Okay, I'll just maybe start with a quick comment with respect to the speech from the throne that came today. What we've seen here today is a number of vague promises, really a plan that speaks about a number of other plans that the federal government is going to act on, and some re-announcements of some of the plans that they've had in the past. We are seeing nothing in this speech from the throne that addresses any of the concerns that Saskatchewan had put forward, and by extension addresses none of the concerns that the premiers from the Council of Federation table had put forward as well. So this most certainly would not be a speech from the throne that I would support. We are hearing from two of the opposition parties that they will not be supporting this speech from the throne, and so we'll be looking to the NDP as to whether or not they will be supporting this speech from the throne, and in doing so, if they choose to do so, and the leader of the NDP has said that these are good words and that he is willing to support this speech from the throne, he will single-handedly be propping up a minority government and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to consider what up until this point has been nothing short of an assault on Western Canadian industries. So we'll be watching very closely over the course of the next week through the discussion around this speech from the throne as we get into some of the details, the further clarifications that may come this evening. We'll be watching very closely as to who votes to support and who votes to not support Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the continuance of his government. The federal NDP and the provincial NDP are one party.
So, will you be attempting to blame Ryan Miley for that?
I would be laying the blame where it squarely should lie, and that is within the NDP party in Canada, which includes the NDP party in our provinces.
But as you talk about Saskatchewan priorities not being in there, but as you said many times, Saskatchewan has managed quite well economically, and even in terms of the spread of the virus compared to other parts of Canada. So does it make sense in some ways that the priority was, say, concerns in Ontario or Quebec, around long-term care homes, for example, when Saskatchewan was prepared for some of the worst of the pandemic, and that's what the throne was able to really address?
Right, no, and what you're seeing are comments coming from the Premier of that area, particularly Quebec, where he views this speech from the throne and the commitments specifically, around pharmacare and around long-term care standards as being an all-out assault on provincial jurisdiction. So that Premier is not happy. I'll let him speak more to his comments around the speech from the throne and the infringement on provincial jurisdiction. But we most certainly from this province are not happy, because none of the priorities that we had put forward with respect on how we are going to recover the economy here in this province were addressed in this speech from the throne in any way.
Do you want to see a federal election to support that?
Do I want it? That'll be up to the MPs that sit in the House. As I said, we'll be watching very closely to see which MPs vote to uphold this government. There was two mentions of Saskatchewan. That was one of them. One was with respect to the contact tracing app. The second was with respect to how they are going to transition the energy sector out of the energy sector workers out of the actual energy sector, which I think speaks to the support that I have for my opening comments, where we would not be supporting the speech from the throne, and we would encourage all MPs to not support it. It simply is not a speech from the throne with much substance, most certainly any substance around supporting any of the industries that create wealth and build our communities in this province.
The speech said that it would support farmers and other sectors in climate change efforts. How do you take that?
I don't know how to take that, because even by throne speech standards, which are very vague, this was a very vague speech from the throne. You know, it's interesting in this year that we have time to bring together a speech from the throne, but we haven't been able to bring together a budget. I would like to see a budget, a federal budget in this particular year, to know where precisely the support is coming from, where it is going, how that is supporting Saskatchewan industries. I'd also like to see a budget so that I know just exactly where we are from an accounting perspective, and how long, how many generations it is going to take to pay for some of the dollars that have been flowing through the federal government's hands with virtually no accountability this year.
This isn't the first time that we've heard about the federal commitment to getting to net zero down the road.
It's a continued effort by this government. Listen, today and yesterday we're in the Supreme Court of Canada fighting for hardworking Saskatchewan jobs against this federal government in their ideological policy around as it pertains to carbon taxation. And again, I'll say again, an ineffective tax that only taxes the hardworking people of this province and this nation with no real outcomes with respect to the environment. Doesn't reduce emissions, it only reduces jobs in Canada. We're very much a wrong-headed approach, a wrong-headed policy, and we have promised from day one that we would take that to the Supreme Court of Canada. We're there today. That's one example of the sustained effort that this government has had to phase out an industry that I would say is one of the largest revenue generators in this nation. Governments don't just show up and create new jobs and create new industries. Government needs to foster the industries that are already creating wealth in our communities across this province and across the nation.
So, what is your kind of number one concern that you found has
No support for the energy industry in particular, but no support for the agriculture industry here in the province as well. Yeah, I find it concerning, in particular in respect to healthcare. And I think Premier Pallister had made these mentions last Friday when he was in Ottawa as part of our COF delegation, where we had requests around fiscal transfers, most notably the Fiscal Stabilization Program and the Canada Health Transfer, where he was asked the very question around pharmacare, which is in the healthcare realm, which is in the provincial jurisdiction, and the federal government is committing to moving forward with the pharmacare program. From Saskatchewan's perspective, we already have one of the most comprehensive pharmaceutical coverage programs in the nation, one that we're very proud of. So we'll be watching that very closely. But this is moving in dangerously close into provincial jurisdiction, and in an area where we are already underfunded. The federal government, at the beginning of the health agreement, was a 50-50 partner with the provinces on health transfers. They're now reduced to about 20 to 22%, varying with different jurisdictions across the nation. They have slipped over successive governments, in fairness, not just this current Liberal government, but over successive governments. And there is a request to really build the foundations of the house before you add another level. Pharmacare being the other level, long-term care standards being a fourth level on that house. We really need to rebuild the foundation, and we need to have the very real and substantial partnership of the federal government in a renegotiation of the Canada Health Transfer. The Prime Minister is committed to entering into that negotiation. We look forward to it. We were looking for some comment or some mention of that in this very vague speech from the throne. We didn't get it. We got comments around the third and fourth level of that home, but nothing on the repairing of the foundation. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you mention it? Why wouldn't you mention, something that is very important, coming a consensus ask from 13 premiers among the 10 provinces and 3 territories? That would most certainly be something that I would want to speak to, as he represents collectively the very same number of Canadians that we do as premiers. Well, there's a lot of depends in that, if you will. As I said, we have a very comprehensive pharmaceutical coverage program here in Saskatchewan now, one of the best, if not the best, in the nation. And so we wouldn't want to be hindered for early action in that case. So there's a number of concerns that we have as that discussion transpires, and we would encourage the federal government, rather than highlighting building that level 3, level 4 of a home, really focus on what the premiers have requested collectively together, is to really have that very serious negotiation. We've asked to increase it to 35%, not even to 50% where we had began, but let's increase the federal share of healthcare funding in this nation that has really been highlighted by this pandemic with some of the challenges that we have across the nation, which are different in different areas. Let's work together to ensure that we are funding healthcare in a fair and equitable manner across Canada. That's what we were looking for in this speech from the throne. That's why we sent a letter, and 4 premiers flew to Ottawa last Friday, was to request just that type of a commitment. What didn't happen? Well, listen, when we deal with the federal government, we need to deal on behalf of the residents of Saskatchewan. That is on an issue-by-issue basis. We have worked very hard with the federal government, myself in two roles, one as the Premier of Saskatchewan, two as the Chair of the Council of Federation, to ensure that we've been able to work with the federal government on ensuring that any funding that is flowing to the provinces is flowing to areas where the provinces can actually apply those dollars, that investment, to be effective. For that to happen, we need flexibility. What we're seeing today in the speech from the throne is, again, in the case of healthcare funding, a lack of that flexibility being committed to. They want to fund specific initiatives that the federal government has put forward, such as long-term care standards, such as pharmacare. What they need to do is to move to a flat funding model where we can, through the Canada Health Transfer, increasing their share of funding into the Canada Health Transfer to 35%, so that we can ultimately as provinces address where some of the challenges we have in our specific jurisdiction, which are different from coast to coast to coast, but we can address those at a provincial basis in what is exclusively a provincial jurisdiction. Well, we continue to work. Well, first of all, we'll finish off our arguments at the Supreme Court of Canada on the case for the carbon tax. We'll continue to work with the other premiers at the Council of Federation level, as we have our Council of Federation meetings tomorrow and Friday virtually on the which will start the conversations around the Canada Health Transfer changes that need to happen. That should lead into a First Minister's meeting this fall, where that will be exclusively dedicated to the Canada Health Transfer. But listen, there's a number of other transfers that need to be discussed here as well. We're all well aware of the flawed equalization formula that we have in this nation, and its little brother, the Fiscal Stabilization Program, which is to step in on the shorter-term basis to support some of those jurisdictions that are having shorter-term challenges in their general revenue or in their in the energy sector specifically. There's been some changes that have been suggested by the premiers to the federal government there as well to support, yes, Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, but also to a larger degree Alberta and some of the other provinces that have experienced some GDP declines over the course of the last year or two with some of the contraction of our trade around the world. These are priority issues for all 13 premiers agreed to in our meetings, and these are priority issues that we expect the federal government, we would have expected them to address in today's speech from the throne. They didn't. We would hope they would address them in a budget that should be delivered this year. To my knowledge, I think you need to introduce a budget each and every year. I haven't heard a commitment to that. But these are also issues that we will address through First Minister's meetings that we will have with all of the premiers and the federal government, as well as meetings between Saskatchewan and the federal government. Right.
The government of Saskatchewan asking for it, but that seems to be a little bit of what you're asking for the federal government here, is that on one hand you want to see their accounting for their budget, on the other hand you're asking for massive transformational changes and extra spending for the energy industry and whatnot. So isn't that a bit hypocritical for you as Saskatchewan?
Well, the investment of all levels of government needs to be prudent. We have a federal government now that now is looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of a $350 billion deficit. Not a $350 billion budget, but a $350 billion deficit as per the parliamentary budget officer. If we look at that deficit, that's 25% larger than the last budget that was introduced and passed by the Harper government. So that's where we have come in 5 short years, is to have a deficit that is 25% larger than the last budget under the previous government. You know, so here's my point: is the $350 billion that this government has looked to put out the door. In that should have already been the conversation around properly funding healthcare in this province. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We're in the middle of delivering the services, provincial jurisdiction, I might add, delivering those healthcare services in each of our provinces and territories across the nation. It only stands to reason that this is the time for the federal government to have a very serious discussion and very quick discussion about elevating their share of our healthcare transfer here in the nation. That has slipped, no fault to this government specifically, but to multiple governments, has slipped from 50% down to about 20. It needs to come back to 35, and it needs to do so very quickly. if the federal government survives this, we are going to be, again, under sustained pressure in the industries across the prairie provinces, and I would say by extension these industries have a great impact on jobs across the nation. This has been a very divisive government. I'd said that after the last federal election that we had. We have a separatist party, an outright separatist party in Quebec that is gaining steam. We have separatist sentiments in this province and in the province to the west of us. I've said many times I do understand where those sentiments are coming from. I do feel that the federal government at times is picking winners and losers, as per to quote some of the arguments at the Supreme Court case yesterday. The federal government is attempting to pick winners and losers in the Canadian industries on ideological reasons, and for no other reason outside of ideological reasons, and that is very painful for our economy. You look at what is happening to the deficit here in Saskatchewan, some of that due to COVID, some of that due to some of the policies that have come from Ottawa on our energy industry, as well as some of our other industries. So you look at it's exacerbated in the province of Alberta, where they are more reliant on the energy industry. So, what will that do for Western alienation? I think it will continue the discussion around Western alienation. I don't know if there will be an election this fall, next spring, when a federal election would be. What I do know is that this is a speech from the throne that is very vague, even by speech from the throne standards, and it's not a speech of the throne that the Premier of Saskatchewan would support.
Why don't you come out and say you support an election? Because it sounds like you're unhappy with where the Liberal government, minority Liberal government, is going generally, but so wouldn't it be in Saskatchewan's interest for you as a leader to say, yeah, we need an election, especially since so many of your policies are aligned with Conservatives?
Or for the federal government to address some of the concerns that I had voiced to the Prime Minister through a letter on behalf of all of the people of Saskatchewan. Put the carbon tax on pause. You can do that with a stroke of a pen. Start some very serious discussion about funding SMRs, true baseload, zero-emission nuclear power available in the nation of Canada. Canada has an opportunity to be a leader on the climate change front and on the emissions front through innovation in SMRs, through advocating, for example, through Article 6 of the Paris Accord, to advocate for credits for uranium exports to feed those nuclear power plants all around the world, and also to advocate for credits in our agriculture industry, one of the most sustainable agriculture industries in the world. This is what a federal government should be doing. It doesn't matter who's leading it. If they did those types of things, Saskatchewan would be supportive. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I would just say this, that the government's been very clear and concise on masking policy here in the province. Is if you can keep your physical distance, then you wouldn't need to wear a mask. If you are unable to keep that distance, you should carry a mask. I carry mine, and you should put that mask on, and there should be no stigma as to whether someone is wearing a mask or isn't wearing a mask. But if you're unable to keep that physical distance from people, you most certainly should have a mask, and you should put it on. I haven't talked to Mr. Cheveldayoff about his comments, but with respect to the schools, I would say this to the people of the province. What we have done, and I believe we have a very strong plan, one of the strongest plans in the nation when it comes to a safe return to school policy. But I would say to parents on both sides of this very conversation is, one, let's be a little understanding of both sides, and let's be understanding of the global pandemic that we are in, and that we are not always trying to protect just ourselves, but we're trying to protect those that are vulnerable in our society and those that are vulnerable in our families. And so let's be understanding of others in that conversation. We have put forward, when it comes to education, a provincial levels of operation where we have allowed school divisions to enact a masking policy at this point in time. We have even allowed in a certain higher population schools and those divisions to look at, if they need to at some point, to potentially cohort some of their days. But we have put forward the masking policy for that where school divisions can make a choice whether or not masks are mandatory and in what grades they would be mandatory in their division and what schools they would be mandatory. Many have taken that to most of the schools in their division, not all. Some school divisions have not moved forward with a masking policy. If your particular school is one where that conversation needs to occur, there are school community councils that can be engaged and you can have that discussion. But I would ask people that if you're going to enter into that discussion, do so with a real understanding of who is actually at risk with COVID-19. Our risks are different between young, vibrant teenagers, for example, versus the elderly in our community. And you know, Saskatchewan is in a very good place when it comes to COVID-19 and our infection rates. That collective success has only been possible through the personal commitment and how seriously Saskatchewan people have taken their personal commitment to the public health recommendations that are there. Anytime we've had a challenge, it's when someone has stepped outside of those recommendations. So let's be respectful, let's be kind to one another, and let's just, you know, understand that we are going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. We're going to have a couple discussions along the way, though.
There was speculation that this might have been much more radical, that it may have involved a transformational reimagining the nature of social programs.
Right.
Are you at least relieved that it didn't appear to go that far?
No, relief wouldn't be the appropriate word. I mean, the only time in this speech from the throne that Saskatchewan was essentially mentioned was in the phase out of our energy industry workers. That in no way provides me with any relief of the direction of this current government. We're going to be watching very closely as we see the federal Conservative Party and the Bloc have indicated they're likely not going to be supporting it. We have concerns that the NDP will be supporting a speech from the throne where the only highlight of Saskatchewan is that we're going to phase out one of the largest industries and one of the industries that creates employment for people across this province. That's not something I could support, and it's not something I would expect that any Canadian MP would support. That's the only mention of Saskatchewan. It wasn't in there in support of the energy industry continuing as one of the most sustainable energy industries in the world. Those would have been words that would have been supportive of Saskatchewan energy industry workers. They were not in there. Thank you.